Thank you. Is this working?
Why don't you come over here?
Thank you. That's a really good question. It really depends on the thinker, because even though I was generalizing, talking about the Kyoto school, the different individual thinkers each had their own version of what that would entail. For example, the founder of the school, who did not take part in these symposia, Nishida Kitaro, he didn't really talk about political philosophy, or he didn't really directly address the co-prosperity sphere until later in his career. But he did start, in his early writings. In his mid-period writings in the 1920s, he talks about nothingness, and initially this was an epistemological concept. It was a way for him to overcome the subject-object dichotomy, but then he broadens that. He starts talking about the historical world and the interrelationships between people, and so the concept becomes expanded. And the other thinkers, like the co-founder of the Kyoto School, Tanabe, also uses the concept of nothingness. And then the second generation who took part in this symposia, they tried to apply this concept more directly towards what was happening, and they related it to the co-prosperity sphere. But they also do this in different ways. For example, spatially, we could talk about nothingness as a space for cooperating, autonomous but cooperating, coexisting nations or peoples working together. And so the Japanese government that was proclaiming the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere in the East Asian region, for the Kyoto School thinkers, that would have been one example of that, except that they wanted this to be established according to their understanding of nothingness, rather than the way it was actually being done by the military in a very aggressive manner. So they were critiquing the military for that, but nothingness would provide a kind of a space for coexistence. Also, in another way, they spoke of nothingness in terms of time, in terms of history, because one of their critiques of modernity was their response to historicism that was affecting Europe. European intellectuals were driven to a kind of an existential crisis, according to the Kyoto School thinkers, over the question of historicism that leads to relativism and skepticism. And so people like Kosaka Masaki talked about how the Japanese would not have to experience the crisis of historicism because they have their own form of historicism based on the concept of, based on the principle of nothingness that animates and drives history with novelty and unpredictability. And so for Japan, their understanding of history, their historical consciousness is going to be manifest in action, and that embodies their historical consciousness, and so they don't have to be driven to a crisis. So these are different examples of how they try to apply the concept of nothingness. But really, we have to look at the different individual thinkers, because they're all slightly different from each other, and they have their own interpretations of what this entails.
Thank you, it's very helpful.